The dinner rush had just begun when Daniel, a quiet, single father of a 7-year-old girl, slipped into a corner booth of the small roadside diner. It had been a long day at work, and he was grateful for the warm lights and the soft clatter of plates that made the place feel almost like home. His daughter Lily colored quietly across from him, humming to herself. That was when he first noticed the waitress. She moved quickly between tables. Her smile, bright but strangely fragile, as if it had been carefully painted on. Daniel had learned to read small signals in people. Lily alone had made him observant, protective, and deeply aware of discomfort in others. The first sign was the way her shoulders stiffened. Every time a particular group of 5 men at the back table called her over, their laughter was too loud, too sharp, cutting through the air. The second sign was how she avoided eye contact with them, keeping her gaze fixed on her notepad while they leaned too close, invading her space. Daniel saw one of the men deliberately brush her hand when she set down a glass, and she flinched almost imperceptibly before forcing another smile. The third sign was the trembling. When she came to refill Daniel's coffee, her hands shook just enough for a few drops to spill onto the saucer. She apologized softly, though it clearly wasn't her fault. Daniel reassured her, but he noticed her eyes darting nervously toward the back of the diner. The fourth sign was how long she stayed in the kitchen afterward. Through the open swing doors, he caught a glimpse of her standing still for a moment, taking a deep breath as if trying to gather courage before returning to the floor. Then the fifth sign, perhaps the most telling, was the look she gave the manager. She approached him once, whispering something urgently, but he barely glanced up from the register before shrugging dismissively. Daniel felt a familiar heat rise in his chest. He had seen that look before years ago, when Lily's mother had been afraid to speak up in a crowded subway station. He had regretted staying silent then, watching this young woman endure humiliation under bright fluorescent lights, while others pretended not to notice, stirred something unshakable inside him. Lily looked up from her coloring and followed his gaze. "Daddy, is that lady okay?" she whispered. Daniel's jaw tightened as the men called the waitress over again, their laughter echoing louder than before. In that moment, he knew he couldn't ignore the signs any longer. Silence would make him just another bystander, and that was something he refused to be. The laughter from the back table grew louder, sharper, and more deliberate, as if the 5 men had realized no one was going to stop them. Daniel watched as Emily approached their table again, her steps slower this time. One of the men leaned back in his chair, blocking her path, while another slid his empty glass toward her and said something that made the others burst into crude laughter. Daniel couldn't hear every word, but he didn't need to. The tone was enough. Lily shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her small fingers gripping her crayon tighter. "Daddy, they're being mean," she whispered. That was the final push Daniel needed. He stood up calmly, not wanting to frighten his daughter, and walked toward the men's table. His heart pounded, but his voice, when he spoke, was steady. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, looking directly at the man who had been doing most of the talking. The table fell silent for a moment, surprised that anyone had dared to interrupt. One of the men smirked. "Mind your business," he replied casually. Daniel didn't back down. "It became my business when you started making her uncomfortable," he said firmly. Emily stood frozen beside the table, clearly torn between gratitude and fear. The men tried to laugh it off, claiming they were just joking. Daniel glanced around the diner, noticing other customers now watching the scene unfold. "Jokes are funny to everyone," he said. "She's not laughing." His words carried weight, not anger, but conviction. The manager stepped forward at last, clearly uneasy with the attention the confrontation had drawn. Daniel turned to him. "You need to handle this," he said evenly. "Your employee shouldn't have to tolerate harassment to keep her job." The room was quiet, except for the hum of the refrigerator behind the counter. Faced with a room full of witnesses and Daniel's unwavering stare, the manager finally asked the men to settle their bill and leave. They grumbled, muttering insults under their breath, but the shift in atmosphere was undeniable. As they pushed their chairs back and walked out, the tension seemed to drain from the diner like air escaping a balloon. Emily exhaled shakily, her composure cracking for the first time. Daniel returned to his booth, kneeling beside Lily. Sometimes, he told her softly. Being brave just means saying something when it's hard. Lily nodded, her eyes shining with pride. Across the room, Emily met Daniel's gaze, her expression filled with quiet gratitude. He didn't need words to understand. The diner slowly returned to its usual rhythm after the men left, but the air still felt different, lighter, yet thoughtful, as if everyone had silently learned something important. Daniel sat back down in the booth, his pulse finally beginning to steady. Lily looked up at him with wide, admiring eyes. "Daddy, you were like a hero," she whispered. He smiled gently and brushed a strand of hair from her face. "No, sweetheart," he replied softly. "I just did what anyone should do." But deep down, he knew not everyone would have stepped in. Many had seen the same signs he did, and chosen to look away. A few minutes later, Emily approached their table again. This time, her smile was real, still a little shaky, but no longer forced. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "You didn't have to do that." Daniel shook his head. "Yes, I did," he answered simply. "No one deserves to feel unsafe at work." She hesitated before admitting that it wasn't the first time those men had behaved that way. They were regulars, and she had been afraid of losing her job if she complained too much. Daniel glanced toward the manager, who now avoided eye contact, suddenly very busy wiping an already clean counter. Lily reached into her small backpack and pulled out one of her drawings, a bright picture of a stick-figure family standing under a big yellow sun. She slid it across the table to Emily. "This is for you," she said shyly, "so you won't be scared." Emily's eyes filled with tears. She quickly tried to blink away. She knelt slightly to Lily's level and accepted the drawing like it was something priceless. "I won't forget this," she promised. When Daniel paid the bill, he left a generous tip and a short note on the receipt. Courage grows when someone chooses to speak. As he and Lily stepped outside into the cool evening air, he felt a quiet sense of peace. He hadn't planned to confront anyone that night. He had only planned dinner with his daughter. But sometimes life presents moments that define who we are. As they walked hand in hand to the car, Lily squeezed his fingers. "I'm glad you didn't stay quiet," she said. Daniel looked up at the dark sky, scattered with stars, and realized that bravery isn't always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it's simply refusing to ignore the 5 small signs that tell you someone needs help, deciding that silence is not an option.